So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Top DNS Best Practice webinar. I see there are still people joining the room, so the webinar will begin shortly. Please hold the line. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Top DNS Best Practice webinar. I see there are still people joining the room, so we will begin shortly. Please stay on the line. So again, welcome to the Top DNS Best Practice webinar. This is part 8, Best Practices for Handling Abuse Reports and Takedowns. My name is Lars Steffen. I'll be the host for today's session, and I'm I'm head of International Digital Infrastructure and Resilience at the ECO Association. And today I have with me two great speakers who are Sven Krohlas, he's data analyst from Spamhaus and Abuse CH, and Volker Greimann, he's head of policy and compliance at CentralNIC, part of the Team Internet group. Before we get things started, I just want to take you briefly through our housekeeping rules. Of course, this is a webinar, so this will be recorded, and the recording will be available shortly after the meeting. You are muted throughout the webinar, but of course you can ask questions anytime during the webinar. So on the right-hand side of your screen, you will see the questions part of the GoToWebinar application, where you can type in your question, or you can also raise your hand by clicking the raise your hand button. Then we will unmute you, and before you ask your question, we would ask you to please state your name and your affiliation. And after the webinar, you will see a short survey if this webinar met your expectations and was helpful. And we are always appreciate if you can provide feedback on the webinar to learn and to improve. This webinar is organized by the Top DNS initiative from ECO, which is an initiative that was founded in 2021 to fight DNS abuse, but also all the aspects around this. Here you can see the list of supporters. And if you think that your organization should also appear on this list, please feel free to contact us anytime. So here you can see the URL to our website where you can find further information. And of course, this initiative is led by a steering committee, which you can see here. And as you can see, we have some very famous and familiar faces from the industry represented on this group, including Volker, who's one of the speakers today. If you want to contact the Top DNS initiative, please follow the URL to our website or send us an email. What is the Top DNS initiative doing? So we do primarily outreach. So for example, 2 weeks ago, we met with the European Commission for a full day workshop to give them an update on what the industry is doing in terms of fighting DNS abuse. We organize workshops, for example, like at the Nordic Domain Days. We did this already for the last 4 years, but also at the Nordic Domain Days in April this year, we will be featuring a full day workshop again. And will also be present at industry events like CloudFest, ICANN meetings, etc., etc. So if you want to learn more, please reach out to us. And if you are interested in further webinars from ECHO and the topDNS initiative, I can recommend you to pencil the 2 following dates into your calendar. So the next webinar that we will be offering will be on the 25th of March, which will be the readout webinar to the ICANN 82 that is taking place in Seattle in 2 weeks' time. And the next topDNS best practice webinar will be held on the 2nd of April. We will publish the link and also the registration very shortly. But just to let you know that those are the next 2 webinars and the days that you can look out for on our website or in our newsletters. And with this, I would like to get things started and dive into substance. And the first speaker today is Sven. And now I will hand over to Sven, and that we can also share his screen and see the slides.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. And wow, the screen sharing pops directly up. That's cool. So let's get this started and put it on full screen. So thanks for the introduction. My name is Sven Krohlas. You can find me and Spamhaus, of course, on the usual social networks like LinkedIn. And the next about 30 minutes will be about how to handle abuse reports and takedowns effectively, because, well, it's not always that effective. You all know that from the reality we see. I suppose there are many people here who receive or send takedown requests for bad stuff on the internet. So together we will make the internet a bit a safer place. So yeah, about me, I'm with Spamhaus now for a bit more more than 1 year. I'm doing phishing detection mainly. Before that, I was doing takedowns for another company or with another company, mainly for the financial industry in Europe. And yeah, before that, I was doing email security. Also there, we had lots of abuse and had to handle all that stuff. So let's have a look at the situation we are talking about. Yeah, so let's get everyone here on the same level, hopefully. And what's the situation? So this is not a quote from someone, well, in the real world. It's a made up thing, but basically you could quote me with something like that from my experience with takedowns, because, well, there's so much bad stuff on the internet and you report it and you think your report is great, but then it takes ages for something to happen. And maybe you end up with long debates with whoever you reported it to. And that is very frustrating and not really productive for both involved sides. And that frustration, well, I think that is really widespread in the business for all the people who do or handle takedowns. And we can really improve that. And this is what the next few minutes are about. So basically, yeah, the situation. We want quick takedowns. Well, if there's a phishing or malware or whatever site out there, for example, or mailbox or yeah, whatever you have, well, you want it to disappear basically immediately, which is of course impossible, but you want it to disappear quickly. And that implies no long debates and a streamlined, smooth process. But the reality is, well, you get stuff like replies from a legal department. So are you really allowed to report that stuff? You know, stuff like that. We've all been there, I suppose, or at least many of us. You get questions back. Well, we can't see it. There is nothing. So what do you see? And that takes time. And of course, what we quite often hear, at least that's my experience, well, no, we are not involved in that. We are not responsible. So that is very frustrating and that can be improved. So that's why I'm talking about how to report that stuff. And there are some, well, good best practices and, well, things you should not do, but we will get to that. So that's also typical, yeah. So whoever you report stuff to, they don't understand my reports. Oh my God, yeah. And this will be the slide that you will see for the next few minutes, because that's the main thing actually. The do's and don'ts with the reports. And I think I summarized some things here that are well known and some things that are, best practices and unwritten, rules. Well, whatever you report, you have a claim. So this is malware, this is a phishing site. Yeah, you claim something and you should provide proof of it. Of course, you should provide some proof. Yeah, the receiver should not really have to handle all the work to prove it themselves. Of course, they need to be convinced and they need to convince themselves. But if you give them proof of some kind, this streamlines and the process. Everything will be faster. So, for example, screenshots of websites, HTTP logs, stuff like that. And many reports don't have this. Also, the next important thing, and I suppose many, especially casual reporters, are not aware of that, you should give some context. Well, I mainly do phishing, so phishing is a great example here. You have a phishing site for a bank in Germany. Why should the code be written in a way that it pops up if someone visits it from the UK? So why should they do that? So these websites, they have cloaking. They disguise themselves. They simply redirect you to Google or to some innocent site. They will show you a fake 404, nothing found error message, stuff like that. So to actually see the bad stuff, quite often the correct context has to be given. So you have to come from the correct geolocation, sometimes even from a mobile IP if they only target mobile users. The user agent has to be correct. Yeah, why spreads Windows malware to a Mac user, for example? So with the user agent, they know, hey, this is a good victim. So yeah, you need to give the user agent quite often. HTTP headers like accept language also related to the geolocation. And I've seen code from phishing kits that really they use JavaScript, the DOM API and JavaScript, and get so much information out of the web browser, like the screen resolution, aspect ratio, the renderer. Oh, if the renderer is VMware, oh no, then it's running on a virtual machine. That is not a real victim. That's some kind of investigator. Then they won't show you the bad stuff. So all that is important. The next thing, and basically that's just a continuation of the first two ones, you should approach the anti-abuse departments on a technical level. Those are usually techies, and well, speak tech with them. Yeah, what do you see? Yeah, and yeah, that works best in my experience. The next one, having a mechanism to obfuscate reports where needed. That's a sad story because many abuse mailboxes are protected by spam filters. Quite often because the whole mail system is managed by a third-party company and they can switch these spam filters off. And then your abuse reports might not even arrive at the destination. And if they don't arrive at the destination, then, well, they can't do anything because they don't get your message. So once you know that some mailbox out there is protected with a spam filter, you should obfuscate your report. All these phishing links, malware links, stuff like that. The spam filters will very likely trigger and then, well, quite often silently reject your message. You do not even get a bounce quite often. So this is a problem. And on the other hand, and I know sometimes you need to obfuscate, but on the other hand, you should not obfuscate because machine readable data is very important. Because once you have a good reputation as a reporter, once there is some trust for your reports, then the receivers might say, okay, we know them, that stuff can be managed automatically. Maybe even if you don't have that trust yet, but then there will be more sanity checks and stuff. But yeah, machine readable reports are very important. The XRF standard is a prominent thing for that. It's then you have a nice JSON with a known structure, and then tools can work on that 24/7, and that can speed up the takedown massively. Well, okay, those were the do's, but we also need the don'ts, and these don'ts, they are all unwritten rules, and they are my recommendations, and for me they worked well. The first thing, and that's quite a surprise to people I talked before, don't use legal terms. Don't approach whoever you write to with something like, hey, according to this law and that paragraph, you have to do that, and sign it with, yeah, I'm a big lawyer and everything. So it's great that you know the law. It's awesome. But what happens when a techie gets an email with a legal discussion? Most companies have a policy, okay, there's a legal discussion, forward that to the legal department because they are responsible for all legal stuff. And in the end, that great legal department, they know the laws and they know the regulations. They will come to the correct conclusion. Yeah, in a few weeks maybe, or something like that. So you do not want to go down that road if you can avoid it. Then the next thing, that's more cultural thing, because there's a lot of frustration with abuse reports and the responses. Nevertheless, all these abuse departments out there, if there is an abuse department and it's not a bulletproof hoster, all these abuse departments, they are your friends. So treat them as your friends. They are not your enemy. They have the same goals as you. They have KPIs that align with your KPIs. That's awesome. So they are your partners. They are your friends. Yeah, and work with them like that. And in the end, to really shorten your messages and get straight to the point, don't add advertising for your company into those messages. If they're really interested about your company, they can Google you and everything is fine. But that day-to-day business, day-to-day work, yeah, simply shoot for what you want to shoot at and don't add advertisement. Okay. So now we have a rough concept about, yeah, how to report. That was all quite relaxed, what I said, but general rules. But where to report, and that is also very, very important. And the wrong answer to the question, where do I report that, leads to lots of work on your side and the side you report stuff to, and lots of frustration. So this part is really, really important. Yeah, every now and then, I think most people who report takedowns have seen something like that. No, they tell me that is not the right place to ask for a takedown of this. Well, it happens every now and then. Yeah, so here I have an overview, and I suppose there's not much new stuff in there. So the main idea is to correct stuff to the correct places. Reputation list providers are always interested in information about bad stuff on the internet, so we can always report to them. You can report to us, to Spamhaus, or the URL house with abuse.ch. They also belong to us now. Abuse URL house for malware, and our portal for all the rest. Fish Tank for fish, APWG, the anti-phishing working group for fish, AbuseX, NetBeacon, etc., etc., etc. There are many reputation list providers to report stuff to, and that's a good thing. And this is, by the way, really important. So one story that's not on the slides. When I joined Spamhaus, I was surprised because we all know Spamhaus from mail filtering, but there are many other use cases out there. And many hosters, registrars, and registries, they use our data for their anti-abuse processes. So as soon as we list that stuff, then something triggers there and stuff might get suspended soonish or might not. That's not our department, not our responsibility what they do with our data, but they use it somehow in that way. Then we have the registrars and registries out there. you can contact them for fake domains, pure fake. So if you have some bank, I don't know, Santander minus service.xyz, something like this, which is definitely not a real Santander bank. That's a pure fake domain. Usually, not always, they are quite new, relatively new, and you will find nothing good there. So yeah, that's something for the registrar, maybe even the registry, so they can suspend the whole thing. The hosters, of course, they are also quite often involved if there's something hosted somewhere. Well, for mail address, you would contact the mailbox provider, something, yeah, the usual MX provider. The hosters, if you have phishing sites on the internet, well, there is a hoster somewhere. So you should contact them. There might be many, many domains pointing to the same web space. So yeah, one mail can maybe take down dozens of phishing sites. Could happen. But sometimes the hoster is not the correct place to talk to, because sometimes there's a service on the web space, like, short links, or yeah, something like that. And then the hoster can only say, well, we won't take down the whole short link service. We could only, forward your report to them. And this additional hop, this indirect reporting, that costs time. And we want, remember, quick takedowns and efficient takedowns. And so knowing the site owner or the service provider can really, really help for short links, for subdomain provider. Think of Blogspot. Each blog gets a subdomain, and there are many bad blogs out there. Not because they write about stuff I don't want to read, but there's phishing or whatever on these sites. So then you want to contact Blogspot directly. That happens with all subdomain providers, with all short links, short link providers. And one thing that I was surprised at an ICANN meeting, because no one thought about that there, name server operators. They're also quite interesting. Quite often, that's the hoster or the registrar, but not always. Sometimes it's a third party. And if there's a subdomain takeover, someone creates a subdomain on a legit domain or a complete fake domain, going with the name server is also a way to make the sites no longer reachable for the victims. It's still not a complete takedown. The domain is still registered. The web space is still there, but it helps. So yeah, it's also quite hard to find the name server operator. It's a manual process, but many, many people don't think about that one. Yeah, and finally, yeah, how to report that stuff. Yeah, we all know email. You can, who is the IP or domain? You can find emails of the host or registrar there. Some of them have APIs, which is quite nice. That can be well integrated into your takedown tooling if you have some tooling. Some have web forms, which I don't like at all, because you have to open a web browser and copy everything into the web form. You have to solve a captcha. You have to solve it again and again, of course, because I don't know, it was a bit harder than usual. So that really slows down the process. I don't like those at all. And one thing I did not add to the slides, because that's not a good best practice, but sometimes it helps. So now everybody wakes up, I think. I also called some parties out there, and well, that's worked quite well for me for these game server providers. Yeah, you get a Minecraft server and with a domain, and well, they also host phishing there. That happens. And sometimes you can call hacked website owners. Sometimes these are companies, some bakery somewhere, car repair place. Then you call them and tell them, well, I'm here from an IT security company and your server has been hacked. And usually they are extremely surprised and they really cooperate very well. So the site owners, even if they are not IT people, but they work somewhere else, they are really interested in keeping their site up and running. But anyway, I could tell you a funny story about these calls, but sometimes they are needed if something has to go really, really fast, and then it works. But don't do this in your day-to-day business. That doesn't scale. So, and here is one example for a reputation list reporting. That's our threat intel community portal, submit.spamhaus.org. With a web form, of course, you can see it on your screen, and a REST API, so you can integrate it into your tooling. And there you can submit different things, raw emails, URLs, domains, host names, IP addresses, etc., phishing, scam, whatever. Only for malware, we have abuse.ch. And yeah, you can use that one. So that was a little bit of advertisement from me. And now that's the final part already. That's the interactive part. So everybody wake up now. Yeah, that's the interactive part. And if you're in the same time zone as me, do not yet call it a day, because, well, it's not that interactive, but basically I'm going to ask you the same question for all these 4 examples. Where would you report this to? And these are real phishing sites from the last few weeks. Maybe some of them are still online. I haven't checked, so don't visit that stuff. So that first example, that's my trivial example, I call it, commerzbrief.com. For the international listeners, Commerzbank is a German bank. So you can see already parts of that name in that domain name. Brief is German, the German word for letter. And you can see this is a complete fake domain. Yeah, newly registered, very likely. And when you visit it, you see nothing but that fake login of that bank. So where would you report this? So for everybody who watches the recording, now this is the time to pause and think. For all the others, we do not have that much time, but yeah, you had a few seconds, come on. So where would you report this? Well, first of all, everything should go to reputation list providers. And after these 4 examples, I suppose you can repeat that sentence as the first answer at home. Then we have a complete fake domain. So that's also something for the registrar. We want that thing to get suspended. Suspended is, by the way, the best thing from my point of view, because if it gets deleted, then it can be re-registered within seconds. So theoretically, so suspension is the best from my point of view. Then, of course, well, not of course, the name server operators. That might be a completely different party. They could help here, or maybe not. Maybe the name server gets operated by the by the registrar or the hoster. And well, obviously that stuff is hosted somewhere. And as I said before, many domains could point to the same web space. So getting that web space cleaned up is a good thing. The next example, it's a bit different, and it also shows also a bit the one way I like to use to show proof. So here we have a short link, and as you can see in that screenshot, the screenshot includes the Firefox web inspector, the HTML URLs, and there you can see there were redirects from from the short link to the target site, which is a complete phishing domain, something num, but we don't talk about that one here now. It's some Apple ID phishing, again in German. So again, the question, where would you report this to? And well, again, I suppose I said it clearly, the reputation list providers are always interested in your reports. Apart from that, would you report this to the registrar? Hopefully not. I really have to say, because TCO is a valid URL shortener. You don't want to take down the complete shortener. So getting the domain suspended is not the way to go. Theoretically, the registrar could forward your complaints to the domain owner, stuff like that, but that's another level of indirection. You don't want this because that costs time. So what else? The hoster, well, hosters can suspend whole web spaces, can delete some files, but very likely that's a database entry somewhere in the database of TCO. So you want to report it to the site operator directly, which ironically, if I remember correctly, Tico's, they have their own IP, so they're also their own hoster. But this is a special case. So yeah, you want to contact the service operator directly for an efficient takedown. So the next example, yeah, that's one of the nightmares. Yeah, that's a legit domain, although it does not look like it, but well, I found it in one of the reports from a few weeks ago. And there is a website in the well-known directory, and well, it's a phishing site. So another example, another, yeah, procedure that could happen here. So where would you report this to? And again, while you think about the maybe not so obvious stuff, again, I say the reputation list providers are always interested in your reports. Apart from that, obviously, it's a hacked web space. So the, the hoster might be very interested in your report. And if possible, the site owner too. Yeah, I was talking about that with phone calls, so maybe that could be one of these cases. But well, they are definitely interested and should get that stuff removed. And this is a bit ironic because in the well-known directory, there should be, if this was a perfect world, there should be a security text with the security contact information. So that could be integrated into your tooling. This is machine readable. But usually security text is not that widespread as it should be. So I'm also advertising that here. And the phishing website is in that directory. So, well, it's a hacked web space, so the security text might have been removed, even if it was there before. So, well, we'll see. And in the end, my final example, and it's actually my favorite one, because people often ask me when I bring up examples like that, so Sven, does that stuff really exist? How does that work? Well, that stuff exists and that stuff works. We have a legit domain and a phishing subdomain there. So someone, how does it work? Someone gained control of that DNS zone, that DNS management web interface, something like that. And so now they control the zone and they create subdomains with fish in there. And these might point to completely different web space somewhere else. They might complete to the same web space as the main domain. I have no idea. You have to investigate that for every example. So as always, I suppose you can all say that at home now, the reputation list providers are always interested in your reports. Apart from that, there is a hoster, definitely. They are also interested. The site owner, the domain owner of the legit domain, they are also quite interested that they lost control of their domain. They might not realize that because the main site might still work fine, but there are only additional subdomains. So they have no idea yet, maybe. And of course, now, then that's the stuff that people quite often forget. Well, there's a name server that's compromised indirectly, maybe via that management system of the domain. The name server operator is also very much interested in that information. And again, domain owner, security text in the well-known directory, that could work to contact them. Otherwise, you have to scrape the website and have a look at the information they provide there. And this is manual work and does not scale well. So yeah. So that was the end of my part of this webinar. So let's see who will have the first question. So I have to give control to someone else.
No, no, thank you. So first of all, Sven, thank you very much for all the details and the information, and also of the great examples how to look at abuse reports from your angle. As you just asked, are there any questions from the floor that we can now address directly to Sven and to his examples? Yes, we have.
One raised hand, yeah.
Yes.
There's always a
So
first one. More will follow.
So I now have one hand from SD Bornski, and I hope you can now unmute yourself.
Hello, ST from Core Search here, and I had a quick question about if there are any best practices for reporting counterfeit or fake web shops.
That's a hard one. Yeah. I well like these cases because they are interesting. I don't like these cases because they're interesting. These fake shops out there, well, to understand what they are doing, you actually have to use them. So sometimes you might get counterfeit products, and sometimes people actually might want to receive counterfeit products because they don't have the money for the real brand, and then they have these Instagram stories and then they buy that stuff. Sometimes these fake shops, they take your data, your credit card, for example, and that's actually phishing for the credit card. Sometimes it's 419 scam, so you pay and you don't get the goods. So that can be these fake shops, that can be phishing, that can be counterfeit products, that can be scam. That is really, really hard. So counterfeit products, then that's something for legal, I would say, because I don't know which one is legit and which one is not. Yeah, I'm not a brand person. If it's phishing, then it's hard to prove. Some parties out there know phishing groups that use fake shops for their phishing, and well, if they can say that they really have a pattern for that group, then if there's a certain trust level, then that's nice. But overall, for scam, yeah, that's not obvious on the first sight. That needs more convincing, and yeah, it's a bit harder. So that's all I can say here.
Okay, thank you. So we've got another hand from Javier Pignata, and I will give the floor to you, Javier.
Hey all, thank you. Thank you, Sven, for the presentation. Very, very useful. And I have a question out of curiosity. I saw you always put reputation lists on top of reporting options when reporting different cases. Uh, mm, I mean, domains or subdomains or defaced website. So, is there any reason for that, or was just for
Actually, several ones.
coincidence?
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Well, first of all, we have that submission portal, so yeah, okay. But apart from that, it's always part of every report. So then you have some kind of sort order on the slides. So it's basically copy and paste thing for the slides also.
Ah,
And
okay.
yeah, so it's was simpler for me to prepare the slides.
Ah, sorry.
And
I thought there was some hierarchy. Um,
well, I have a third reason, and it depends on you, because reputation lists, there's so many different ways to use them. Some use them to suspend stuff, some use them, for example, for DNS blocking. So if I tag something as phishing, then some of our users might use that for DNS blocking to protect their company or their users. Maybe even maybe it's even an ISP that protects all their users if they use their name servers, of course. It can still be used for emails that have been received. So possible victim clicks on a link in there, and then you get a warning site warning that has by now been reported as possible phishing. Do you really want to proceed? So with a listing, you have immediate results, but they are hard to see. I have to confess that, because everybody uses that data in a different way. So yeah,
yeah,
so
of course.
those were my three reasons for putting that on the top.
Makes total sense. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, and
Thanks for the question.
before we move on to Volker, I have another question in the questions pod, which is from Vido Potters, and the question is, what do you think of having to use web forms when reporting on scale?
Well, web forms don't scale because you have to manually fill them out. The problem is with every web form, there's a REST API behind that web form. Technically, yeah, it's a web form. It's a REST call somewhere. So technically, everybody who has a web form, they have a REST API, but it's protected with captchas and only accessible from their web server. But technically, they have it. So when you see a web form, you might want to ask them for access to that API because technically it exists already. So they might or might not give you access to that.
Okay, and another follow-up question also from Vido is reporting to multiple receivers at the same time comes with the problem that one receiver might not be able to verify the report while another receiver has already taken action. Would a best practice be copying all receivers in the report when using email reports, or at least inform the receiver that others received a report as well?
Oh, that's also complicated. The different receivers, some of them might have a spam filtering in place, others not. So you might want to give them different content, from this that's perspective alone. But well, who's different receivers? You might want to write something different to the registrar than to the site owner than to the hoster. So what I often use is URL scan IO. So there you have complete HTTP log and screenshot. And usually that's really, really good proof even once the site has been taken down.
Okay, thank you very much, Sven. And I think some of those aspects will also be covered by Volker. And also taking a look at the time, I would like to hand over to Volker.
A second. Now I'm unmuted. Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Volker Greimann. I'm the head of compliance and policy at Centronic, which is basically the registrar and registry division of Team Internet. I've been working in the industry for, I think, 17, 18 years now, since 2008. And I started with one small registrar that was in the group, was handling all the abuse cases on my own because that was still possible back then. Now I lead a team of 6 people that basically deal with abuse all day. So just for that. First, I'm going to go into abuse reporting, to do's and don'ts. Some of those points have already been picked up by Sven, but I might be able to elaborate on some of them, and please excuse any duplication. And then I'm going to shine some light on the internal workings of how a registrar deals with abuse cases and reports, and what they can do to make their work better. So if any registrars or registries are listening, they might benefit from that or not. The first question you always need to ask, and Sven already alluded to that, is this the right place for an argument abuse? So basically, make sure that you send the report to the right person. If, for example, the abuse is on our URL and under a subdomain, you should check the domain name first, whether it's a legitimate site, whether it's a hosting site, whether it's a link shortening site. If you do that, you will probably already find a place to report that on that site, and therefore not need to contact the registrar. You can Google the domain name. Sometimes the site doesn't, the domain name address does not resolve, but you can still find that it belongs to some hoster who is using that to provide subdomain hosting or URL hosting. You can check the DNS records or IP address to find the hosting provider. There are basically whois searches for IP addresses that you can use that will help you find the correct hoster if it's just about content. And if you have a copyright complaint, it's usually a content question, not a domain name question, and therefore you should go to the hoster or site operator for that as well. With trademark infringement, you should ask yourself the question, is the domain name the infringing part, or is the content under that domain name on the website the infringing part? Depending on that, you might want to contact the registrar or the hoster. And finally, is it a question of service abuse? Think GeoCities, if you can remember that far back. Think hosting providers, think test beds, think paste places where you can paste texts. If those services are being abused, then the registrar is probably not the right place to address that, because as a registrar, we do not have the option to take away individual items of content. We can only hit the big switch, which is on and off for the domain name. You should always make sure of these points when you're before you send your complaint, because ultimately the registrar is your friend, not your enemy. We have no intent to keep that stuff on our platform, because what is bad for you is usually also bad for us. Things that you need to check before you send. Is the domain still registered with this registrar? Sometimes the domain name was transferred away shortly after you sent the first report, and before the registrar was able to action that. The domain name is now with a different registrar, but you keep on sending the same report to the old registrar, because that's where you sent your first report. That registrar is visibly getting annoyed with your reports at that point, because there's nothing that they can do about it other than tell you to go to the new registrar. And if it's an automated system that's sending those reports only after checking whether the domain name is still live, you will not have a good time, and the registrar will not have a good time. The second thing is the domain still active? You would be amazed at the number of reports we get for domains that we have already actioned, that have already a client hold status on it, that have already been suspended otherwise, that have been sinkholed, that have been set to our abuse name servers, that do not resolve anymore. Check that the fish is still active before you send anything, because ultimately there might have been time between the detection and somebody else might have already reported that. So when you send that email, before you click send, check that as well. The other thing is maintain a civil tone. We're all people. We want to talk in a civilized manner. You see the text over there. I blanked out some choice words in that. This is something that we receive on a daily basis. Nobody likes to read that. And when we see something like that, then it usually means that we will not read any further than the first line. Next thing is, have I included all the necessary information? Is there something that the registrar needs to know other than this domain name is abusive? Do something about it. What kind of abuse? Where can I find that? I'll go a bit more into detail, but basically include as much information in your report as possible, because you must assume that the registrar does not know what you're talking about at that point when they receive the report. Have I provided a contact method for feedback? In many cases, the registrar will need to ask further questions, and they will get back to you if they have these questions. And if you send your complaints from a no reply address, or even worse, Proton Mail email address that never gets looked at, or any other way that you cannot be contacted, then those questions will end up nowhere, and the report will not be actioned. And finally, does the registrar have an abuse policy? Have you checked that policy? Because that usually describes in certain detail what the registrar expects or needs when they receive a report, what kind of abuse they recognize and will action, and what kind of information or evidence you will need to provide for each type of abuse. So check the abuse policy of the registrar. The next thing is, of course, the contents of the report. First, make sure that you highlight the main issue. Have a line at the top that says, I want to report this type of abuse occurring under the domain name X. Why do we do that? Because we are all using ticketing system. If we hover over the title line, we can already see, okay, this type of abuse, that domain name, and we already know what we're talking about. There's many types of complainants that tell you a long story about who they are and what their benefits are to society and who has engaged them. And then they will slowly, at some point, get into what kind of abuse they're actually trying to report. Don't do that. You can include that information. We love that information. It is helpful for us to assess you as a reporter. However, don't lead with that. Be direct and specific in your report. Try to make your points in a concise manner, because the easier it is for us to ingest your report, the easier it is for us to take action as well. If you have a phishing report, then always include a link or a reference to what is being phished. We get a lot of complaints that say, this is a phishing site, do something about it. What's being phished? We might not know that this is the logo of a bank in South Africa that that's on a login page. Just a login page that is nondescript and might not be recognizable as something that is actually being phished. Could just be a login page to an internal website or the management site for their CMS system or anything. Just because it's a login page, it does not mean it's phishing. If it's a login page of a bank and we can compare that to the original login page of that bank, then it makes our job easier to identify that this is indeed phishing. Once you have basically the executive summary out of the way, provide a more thorough description of the problem and the harm that's being done. This is phishing, this is a bank, this is causing millions of dollars of damage potentially, there's a phishing campaign, there's an email spam campaign going on. Any information that you have is helpful to us, because that allows us to assess how urgent the matter is and how much damage is being done, what course of action would be the right way. Provide actionable evidence. Provide the date, the time, the IP addresses from where you and when you have accessed that data. Provide screenshots, links, all kinds of information that you have available that will help us to identify that this is indeed abusive. Because in many cases, as Sven has alluded to, there's geo-blocking, there's other means to obfuscate the kind of abuse. We have seen cases where the abuse is only visible if you click a very certain link that was provided in an email. And if you access the same address from anything else, not from a mobile phone that had that email before, you will not see it. They're very tricky these days. So if you provide screenshots with that information, then that allows us to recognize, okay, this is something that we might not be able to duplicate ourselves, but we still have trusted evidence that we can basically provide. Also note that when we take action against an abuser, we might be breaking our contract with our customer, because we are contracted to provide a service, and if we suddenly cease providing that service and cause an interruption in that service, we're causing potentially damages to that customer. Therefore, if we have evidence to back up the complaint that basically says this was phishing, and we took evidence based on that evidence, it's always easier for us to say, okay, now we can take action because of our terms and conditions because you did that. And if the reporter provides that kind of evidence, it's much easier for us to take action. And the final question that always should be answered is, who are you and whom do you represent? Anonymous complaints have a lot less credibility than complaints that come from a known source, a trusted reporter, or someone who we can recognize as being active in the interest of, for example, the phished entity. So identifying yourself is important. What shouldn't you do? Make a search for the domain or the problem. Don't send us a phishing mail that has 20 different domain names somewhere in the header or the phishing text and say, one of those domain names is with you, and this was spam, and this is phishing. Tell us the domain name at first. Don't make us look through 20 domain names that may or may not be with us to find the one that is, and then make a determination. Hide the reported domain in an attachment. Lawyers are very prone to do that because they send us an email. Hello, dear ladies and gentlemen, please look at the attached PDF file. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Makes it impossible for us to search for that domain name to find that ticket again. Makes it very hard to see that information at first. We need to determine, we need to scan that PDF, whether it's infected or not. You may attach those PDFs, but always have that information in the plain text as well. It just makes it so much easier for us to work with those reports. Don't send mass reports or constant reminders. We have your report. We'll get to it. It might take some time depending on the volumes of reports we get, but sending multiple reports of the same thing will only get you pushed to the back of the queue. Don't use alternative routes. Don't go on the website and find out the email address for the CEO and any other employee of the company. We have an abuse desk, we have an abuse contact email address, and that's the preferred way. Anybody else will not even be able to help you with that. Don't make an annoyance of yourself, is basically what I'm saying. Don't use our abuse desk as a mail forwarding service. There's a lot of people that say, can you forward this to the registrant? No, there's an email address in the whois that's there for that, or now RDAP. There are contact methods that we provide that you can contact the registrant. Do not waste the time of the abuse desk with manual forwarding request. And finally, and this may be a bit controversial, if you have a complaint about certain types of content that are illegal to even look at, don't send those directly to us, but use a third party that can provide a review. The example I'm giving here is CSAM. In Germany, it's illegal to look at that. It's illegal to investigate that unless you're an authorized entity. So when you get a report that says, I've seen CSAM on that website, that ends the investigation at that point. The only thing that we can do at that point is tell you, thank you very much. Now that you've said that there's CSAM, we are not allowed to look at that website anymore because we would be accessing that stuff illegally. We don't want that. We don't want to go to jail. We don't want to even have our people look at that to verify that. Please go to law enforcement or go to, in this case, inhope.org partner organization like ECHO that can do that investigation, that is legally authorized to do that, and then will reach out to us and make sure that we can action that report without having to investigate it ourselves. The below is just an example of a very helpful report. You will see that it doesn't even mention the domain name that is allegedly being abused. So yeah, don't do that. Now coming on to the other side, how do we receive your reports? What do we do, and what can registrars do to be better? Why do we even handle those reports? Why don't just dump them to somewhere? Well, if you have a lot of bad domain names on your platform, you will get a bad reputation for that. And reputational is key in this industry, and is also because you ultimately do not want that kind of customers. Why don't you want those kind of customers? Because if people are looking at defrauding third parties, they might also be defrauding the registrar that are providing the service by using fake credit cards. So there might be a direct financial impact. Also, handling abuse reports takes time. Time is money. Having to look at abuse complaints basically wipes out the revenue for multiple domain names already, and therefore having those domain names on your platform is ultimately a negative financial impact. Sometimes people believe that we are letting those in because we're profiting off those. Ultimately, names are a negative income flow, if you want to say it like that, because they cost us money. And if you take action quickly, you become unattractive to that kind of customer. They go somewhere else, and you benefit by having less complaints to deal with. There's also a contractual relationship. Both the registry agreements that we have with all the registries and also our accreditation agreement with ICANN require us to take action against abuse, and most of those have some very rigid auditing schemes for that as well, and they react to complaints that we haven't been doing our job, and rightly so. So it might even lead to us not even being able to do our business anymore, losing our accreditation with certain TLDs. So there's a very direct interest from our legal obligations as well. Also, financial service providers might have an opinion on you being a provider that has a negative reputation and cease doing business with you at some point. If you get a lot of chargebacks at some point because of fraudulent registrations, then they might ask you questions that you don't have answers for, and therefore making sure that you run a clean ship is very important from that aspect as well. I also feel that we have a social responsibility. We provide a service on the internet, and if the internet devolves into a cesspool of abuse, then people will stop using or registering domain names. They will go to alternative routes of content provision, and that cannot be in our interest as well. We want a clean infrastructure where we can do business legitimately and provide a valued service to customers that is not prone to abuse. And therefore, doing something against abuse is something that we see is our core responsibility as a provider of services on the internet. And finally, there's the legal responsibilities from laws and regulations that may apply to you as a service provider. Intermediary services as they may be, there's still a certain liability that you might have under your jurisdiction where you operate, and therefore complying with local laws is, I think, a no-brainer. How do you deal with these reports? Usually you get quite a number of reports. Monday is always the worst day of the week. You can imagine why. So when handling abuse tickets as a registrar, you should ensure that the actions you take maximum impact. How do you do that? You need to prioritize. Certain types of abuse are more harmful than others. Phishing, malware is, I think, amongst the most problematic types of abuse because a lot of damage can be caused by them and is caused in a very short amount of time. Therefore, if you prioritize those types of abuse that you consider or know are prone to higher harms than others, you will take care of those tickets first. In our case, everything that we take care of first is malware and phishing, then comes everything from law enforcement, and then everything else. What we also have adopted recently, well, 2 years ago, is a process of last in, first out. What does it mean? It means that when a ticket comes in, it's immediately handled. If a ticket has come in 5 hours ago, it might take a while till we get to that, because if you're dealing with malware and phishing, the first hours are key. The first minutes are key because there's the spam campaign that's going out. People are clicking on those links immediately after the domain goes live. So if you can take care of those complaints as soon as possible, you minimize the harm to the rest of the internet community. Therefore, making sure that you are fast on the current complaints is key. That means that certain complaints will take a lot longer. if you have the unlucky time of day that your report comes in at a time when we have a large queue and we are working for last in, first out, then that may mean that your report comes later. That is unfortunately something that we as a service provider accept, because we feel that an older report does less harm. Well, the older abuse does less harm than the newer abuse. I might be mistaken on that, but so far the feedback that we've gotten on that supports that assumption. But it does mean that sometimes less urgent things can take a lot longer to action, but the urgent things are actioned very fast, and that is our key priority. And another thing that we are doing, and that I can just recommend every registrar adopts, is proactive reviews. Don't wait for that complaint. Have a service, use a third party that scans all your new registrations against reputation block lists on a daily basis, that looks at all those good sources of abuse that, for example, Spamhaus is providing, and many others as well. Because if you wait for reports, you will not only see part of the picture. If you send your entire registration database of new registrations to that provider and they match that against those lists, you will be able to see patterns much more easily. You will find domain names that have never been reported to you that might have been reported to the reputation blocklist providers. Another reason why you should report to them. And it makes it just that much easier to deal with reports as well, because you can basically filter, aggregate, enrich those reports through the additional data that comes in from those providers. There's a lot of benefits those providers provide, and therefore, if you use one of those providers, you will have an added benefit, even though they will cost you some money. Ultimately, you save more money by using them. Knowing who reports to you is important for us. A quality reporter that we know that has a good track record with us will get higher priority. They will have a higher trust level. They will probably need less checking than a provider that comes to us the first time, or that has a bad reputation. This kind of trust is usually earned, so every registrar builds that trust internally through the reports that we get over time. If you provide a constant flow of bad reports and report domain names that are not abusive because they somehow matched an AI filter that you're using to match against the brand of your competitor, your customer, and don't react to our feedback, then you might even get banned, because if, for example, you have a quality level of, let's say 70% bad, 30% good, you're not worth our time. We have better reporters that we can deal with, and then we just tell you to go to a reputation provider and go through them, because then your bad reports will be filtered by those reputation service providers, and we don't have to deal with your bad reports. And it's also notable that even though you might be a good reporter or a trusted reporter, we will still do some checking, because even trusted reporters can make mistakes. Some very good reporters send us cancellation notices where they're saying, okay, that report I sent an hour ago, please disregard, because actually we made a mistake. Those are helpful and appreciated. That's the only kind of feedback that we really love after you send the first report, because it makes, obviously, our life easier and it adds to your reputation. The use of third-party enrichment and aggregation services, I alluded to that before, is helpful to us. For us as a registrar that provides the services through resellers, it allows us to aggregate by reseller, send those resellers daily lists of reported domains, allows them to take action. It allows us to have additional information with that report immediately available. It allows us to detect patterns with certain resellers. It is, if you can find a good aggregator or enrichment provider, and there's even free ones out there, use them as registrar, because ultimately they will make your life easier and provide you with such added value that you are able to action reports much more quickly as well. And if you don't have enrichment for a certain report that you're getting, you can still look it up on various reputation websites and abuse feeds, even if it hasn't been reported through your regular channels. Those can be helpful. Even a Trustpilot sometimes gives us some information about how trustworthy a site might be, and might give the deciding factor of whether we shut down a fake shop or not. What I can only recommend, and obviously this is harder to do for smaller registrars than for larger registrars, is to have a dedicated team available that deals almost exclusively with abuse reports, because they will be able to build that experience and be able to action those reports a lot quicker with more certainty, and will provide a much better internal service for you in handling abuse reports. Many other registrars use their support teams for that, and in my experience, the output of those teams is usually less trustworthy and reliable than that of a dedicated team. So it might be worth your consideration of building a dedicated team to have focused on these kinds of reports. Once we get the report, what do we actually do with it? We try to verify and confirm the abuse. If it's not possible, we look at the evidence that's provided with the complaint. We check for geo-blocking or IP blocking services and circumvention methods that might be available. We make sure that it is no service abuse, because nothing is as unfunny as a irate customer on the phone that informs us that we've just suspended his $1 million business or hosting service because we took down a domain name that is actually being used for something else legitimately, and that was just being abused by in some form or shape. We try to make sure to listen to the other side of the story when possible. The more the question goes into is this actually abuse, the longer the investigation may take. If it's a clear open shut case, we will take action immediately. If it's a case where we have some questions, we will reach out to both parties and make sure that, for example, the customer is informed about the report and can provide a statement in response. And one point that I also need to mention is that while we provide services through resellers, many of our resellers are quite adamant that they want to do their own abuse monitoring and want to do the takedowns themselves. And in those cases, we forward those reports to the resellers and inform the complainant that we did that. And tell them as well that if the reseller does not respond to them or take action, then they can come to us, and then we will do that. That introduces a certain form of delay, but unfortunately that cannot be circumvented. So what do we do when we ultimately decide that we need to take action? The first, most obvious, is to notify the customer so they can deal with the issue. The second is, do we suspend the domain? What does suspension mean? It means that the entire domain will no longer function and resolve. It means that email services will cease to function, that any websites will cease to be resolvable, that may be tied to that domain name. Any kind of service, the dynamic DNS services that they may be using for their home network appliances might cease to function. So suspending a domain name is always considered carefully and only done when we are very sure that the actual registration is bad and not just something, an auxiliary service or something that was provided. In some cases, we may decide to delete the domain. Usually that is not the preferred option because, as Sven said, it allows the domain name to be swiftly re-registered in certain TLDs. It allows, it is kind of the ultimate ratio because you better be very damn sure about the abuse complaint. The deletion in some cases cannot be reversed, or if it can be reversed, that reversal is more costly than just setting up the DNS servers again. So deletion of a domain name is usually not the preferred option, but we take it in certain cases. And if we find that we are not the correct place to answer that, to address that issue, then we will inform the complainant where to better address the issue. What can't we do? We can't remove content on a website because we don't host it. We can't disable a single subdomain or URL because usually we are not the DNS service provider. We can't force the registrar to remove or change content. Content is usually outside our remit, and while we can kindly ask them to do that, we have only our only ability is to break our contract and terminate the domain name or suspend the domain name. Therefore, forcing them to do that is kind of problematic. We cannot identify who posted what kind of information on that forum that you don't like. We don't have that kind of access. We don't know that. Why do you contact the registrar about that? We cannot review certain types of complaints like CSAM, like other things that are illegal to look at. We can't enforce foreign laws. If you have a free speech website about certain things in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabian government feels that we should take action against that. No, that's not our law. We have a certain legal system in Germany. We comply with that, but we will not be able to comply with every legal system in the world. And we will certainly not be able to enforce those foreign laws. We cannot be an arbiter of disputes. Ultimately, there's courts, there's arbitration panels. We are not legal experts to the extent that we are authorized or capable of deciding complex legal matters. And that also goes to legal reviews that sometimes are necessary to take action. Maybe just to the point of fake shops, because that was asked earlier. We usually disable fake shops that we can immediately recognize as such. So, because that's in our terms and conditions, and we choose to do that. We are not obliged to do that. We just feel it's the right thing for our registrar. And that means that if the fake shop uses a certain pattern of our CMS system that we already recognize as fake shop, we will take it down. If it's a fake shop that has complaints attached to it with payment fraud, so that it looks like phishing instead of shipping that does not deliver the wares, then we will take action. But we reserve the right not to take action if we cannot be certain. Sometimes it's a gray import site. That's not a fake shop to us. Sometimes it's a site that may or may not be legitimate. We can make that determination. Ultimately, it's a problem that the complainant should resolve with the registrant directly. And then they may ask us about who that registrant is. And usually we will provide that information if we can. Okay, questions?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Volker. So first of all, thank you. First of all, also thank you to the audience. So we are now 20 minutes overtime. Really, apologies for this, but we only lost 3 people over the last 20 minutes. So I thought, I think this is a very good sign that this was a very interesting session. So thank you very much to Volker. Thank you very much to Sven. I think I take a look at the queue, I take a look at the questions pod. There are currently no questions, but if you still have questions, feel free to reach out to us at topDNS. Feel free to reach out to Volker. You currently see his email address. And as we already mentioned, there will be a recording available of this session shortly on the topDNS website, and we will also produce a written summary with the best practices that have been described during this session. With this, I would like to...
Lars has a couple of questions in the pod.
I see that there is one comment that says that lots of phishing sites are cloaking redirection. How do we supply that kind of information over to you? Very tricky.
Indeed, it is. And it's just as tricky for us to identify that. But if you know that there's something like that going on, tell us. Because if you feel that, if you have that information that there is this kind of shenanigans going on, that is helpful for us. Because if you don't provide us that information, then we'll just look at it and say, we don't see anything. Sorry.
Okay.
And then there's a question about the estimated time frame to respond to abuse reports. Difficult to say. It depends on essentially how many reports do we get and when did we get them. Usually we aim to respond within 24 hours. That's the internal nice to have goal that we set ourselves. But it can be if you happen to be on top of the queue at the time somebody is looking at it at that point and not doing anything else, then you might get a response within 5 minutes or an action within 5 minutes. Sometimes it might take longer than that, because if we have a week with a lot of complaints, we only have a certain amount of resources. They are working on abuse complaints all day, but if they do not get to your ticket, it might take a little while till we do. So it's very hard to say this is the time it takes, because working last in first out has that negative side effect for the reporter, that the time to response is very hard to estimate. On the other hand, they can be assured that urgent issues are handled much more quickly.
There's one final question from Michael Wibeke, who is asking, most registrars, for example, in Europe respond well. However, often we are being referred to the UDRP procedure. Is that allowed according to ICANN rules, or is there an obligation of a registrar to act if it's within its reach?
Okay, so that's a good question, and we do that too in certain cases. And the reasoning behind that is, if the domain name merely exists, it is a potential trademark violation, but who are we to know? Its trademark right is very complex, and if it's not being used for further abuse, then we say there is a venue to have that decided, and that's the UDRP. If there is additional abuse, if it's being used for phishing, for spear phishing, for any kind of other abuse, then we have it much easier to say, okay, this is an abuse of domain name. This has been registered for the purpose of abuse. That is something that we can do something about. So basically, how is the domain being used? Is it being used in an abusive manner? Then you should receive a response that the registrar will take action, at least in my view. Mileage may vary amongst my colleagues. And if it's a domain name that has just been registered for parking, for monetization, that just accidentally matches a part of the string that is being trademarked, then you will be referred to a UDRP. We had a case recently where one reporter reported about 20 different domain names, or was it 30? I lost count. That had the word water in it, because the complainant had a brand on the term water, or at least the party that engaged the complainant for their reports had a trademark for the word water in a certain context, and therefore they reported basically anything that had the word water in it that was registered through us. That was one of the reporters that we put on the ban list after they didn't respond to our complaints after the 5th time. Yeah. Any others?
There are no further questions, and I think we should also close the queue now. Thank you very much for everyone who attended, who is taking the time, also the extra time to follow this session. And again, thank you, Volker. Thank you, Sven, for sharing your best practices. And with this, the meeting is adjourned. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.